morning. My name is Bob Corry, and together with Bob Datz and the Brimfield Public Library, we're conducting another in a long series of Brimfield living history interviews. Today we're going to be talking to former Fire Chief Bob Hanna and John Sherris, who was a longtime member of the Brimfield Fire Department, regarding this fire truck in the background, which is the oldest one in Brimfield's history. Why don't you introduce yourselves and go into your career with the Brimfield Fire Department.
Okay, well, as he said, I'm John Sherris. I actually started with the Brimfield Fire Department when I was 13 years old. By my calculations, that probably would have been the spring of 1964. I was on as a junior firefighter, and back at that time, we used to go around town burning off fields for the residents. It would get rid of the dead grass, and they'd get a nice green, lush, new growth coming in. And they would give donations, and at the time we didn't have a fire station. The main fire truck, which was at the time a 58 Ford, was housed in the garage in the center of town, which was where Cumberland Farms is now. And we'd all gather down there, climb up on top of the fire truck, and go out and spend the evening, and burn, depending on how big they were, we would burn off one or maybe two fields, and then the next night we'd continue on, and that was, at that time, how the fire department was perpetuated. And, excuse me, when I turned, at that time also, we were a volunteer fire department, and you could join at 16. So when I turned 16 and got my driver's license, I went to the first meeting I could make after that and applied to be on the fire department and was accepted. And the main paging system at that time was a siren on top of that aforementioned garage. And I lived about 1.5 miles out of town, so I didn't make that many calls, but if I heard the siren, I'd head down and try to get on the truck or whatever. And then things just progressed from there. I served a short period of time, I'm going to say in the early 70s probably, as a lieutenant. And then we paired back on our officers. I went back to being a firefighter until I guess sometime in the 80s I was appointed a lieutenant again. By this time we had become a call fire department, short for a paid-on-call department, which meant that we would actually get paid for going out on fire calls instead of being volunteer. And as I said, I was appointed lieutenant. After a while I was promoted to captain and finally promoted to assistant chief, a position I was retired from approximately 8 years ago. And I went back to being a firefighter and would continue duties like that. And Massachusetts state law says that you cannot perform the duties of a uniformed firefighter after age 65, which I'm older than that. So now I still serve as what they consider a support person, essentially a glorified gopher.
Thank you, John. Bobby?
Yes, I started as a junior too in 1956 and became a senior member in 1960. I went into the service in 62, came out in 66. The selectmen immediately made me fire chief in 1966. This building back here was just built. It was built in 1955, the fire station. It was built with 3 doors. And I stayed on as chief until, probably in the late 70s.
Yeah, I would say I can't really.
In the late 70s. And then I went on as assistant chief because I was working out of town. I was working for Friendly's at the time. And I stayed on as assistant chief until somewhere around 97, somewhere in through there. And then I was highway superintendent at the time, and it just got to be too much. Fire department and highway superintendent at the same time, so I retired somewhere in 97.
All right. Well, why don't we talk about, when to your best memory, when did the Brimfield Fire Department actually come into being?
Well, that's a long story because back in the 20s when this truck was born, there was only one person, and that was the chief that was appointed by the selectmen. All the other people were belonged to the Brimfield Fire Association, or Brimfield Volunteer Fire Department. And that was all the way up until probably about, what did you say, John?
I think it was around 1980 or 81
Right.
that we stopped being a volunteer fire department, and the chief met with the selectmen and got us enrolled as a paid-on-call department.
Okay, now, today the structure of the fire department obviously is developed partially in response to state laws, right? And how has that changed? How are the fire officers selected? How are they, and the firefighters? How does that work?
Well, now or back
Now.
in the old days?
Well, why don't we go, when it went from volunteer to call?
Okay. Back, like I said, back in those days, it was volunteer, and we had meetings every month, and that sort of thing. And we did that because we used to raise money for the ambulance. Okay, and we had carnivals in town, and suppers, and you know, all the things to raise money.
But that was for the ambulance or for the fire department?
That was for the ambulance.
Okay.
But the fire association owned and ran the ambulance.
All right.
And
Now, you used to run these festivals where the Brimfield Elementary School is now.
Right.
That was at one time
right.
a big field. Will you talk a little bit about that? What went on in these festivals?
Oh, we had every summer there was at least a 4-day carnival, and they had Ferris wheels and all kinds of kid rides and all kinds of booths, beer booths. We were the only ones, to my knowledge, that ever got a permit for beer on elementary school grounds. I don't think anybody else did. But again, to raise money, and we would hire a carnival guy. He'd come in the wintertime, and we'd meet with him and, you know, do the whole thing, and then we'd get a percentage of what he got. Well, it got to the point where he was getting all the percentage and we were doing all the work and nothing was happening. Fortunately, in '86 there was a group of people in town that took over the ambulance and have done a great job, and took it away from us because we were fighting fires, trying to raise money, trying to do all this stuff, and it just, as volunteers, and because none of us got paid.
Yeah.
We didn't get paid going out on the ambulance. We didn't get paid for, well, I take that back. We got $1 an hour for grass fire, or forest fire. That was it. But the committee that has the ambulance now has done a great job, and that was one of the reasons why we did it.
Okay. we're gonna go back in time here. Tell the audience what you know about how fires were controlled and fought back when the town was still settled, up to the time this old timer was bought in the late 20s.
Well, there is a fire bucket sitting here. I do not know how extensively they were used in Brimfield, but what I have read, what I understand, communities that did use this, every household was required to have one of these buckets. And they would ring a gong or a bell or something in the event of a fire. And if you weren't an able-bodied person able to go fight the fire, you were supposed to throw your bucket out in the street so that somebody else could come along and pick it up and use it to fight the fire. And if you didn't, they kept track, and if you didn't throw your bucket out in the street, I believe you could be fined. And the people that took the buckets to the fire, they would have to find a water source, watering trough, if there was a pond nearby, a stream, whatever. And they would do bucket brigades, fill the buckets at the water source, pass them up a line of people, and the person closest to the fire would throw the bucket of water onto the fire and send it back again.
Okay, just want to show you this one. This is believed to be a real one, except for this leather strap. The inside of it is canvas, if you can make that out. And that would hold water. And the idea was to get water onto the fire in your house or your neighbor's house as fast as possible when it was discovered. To give you the best chance of controlling the fire. After you ran out of this, you were pretty much out of luck if the fire was too big. But, okay. All right, the Brimfield Hotel that used to be on where the parking lot for the Hitchcock Academy is today, burned down twice. The last time we think was somewhere in the mid-1940s after the Second World War. What do you know about those fires? In particular, how people in the hotel, like the staff, might have fought fires if they discovered them in time? And how would they ring a bell?
Well,
I mean, how would they get the firefighters there?
through the siren.
Through the siren?
The siren was on top of the Brimfield garage, and that's the same siren that's on that pole over there now.
It's the same one?
Yeah. Oh, no, I take that back. We changed that. That's the one from Gilman's.
Okay.
That used to be on top of Gilman's because the siren would ring both in the center of town and down in East Brimfield.
You might mention that Gilman's is where County Line is
Right,
today, the hardware
Right.
store.
right.
And there used to be, this fire truck actually was stationed there for a period of time
was
to
stationed,
protect East Brimfield.
right, it was stationed there from the 40s until probably the 60s, when this station opened up and we had room, we had room for them. But it was funny because this truck was too big for Gilman's garage. That's why, well, it's not on there, but the windshield had to be cut down.
Huh.
And the ladders that were on it was so long, they had to cut a hole in the back of the garage down there. And when you backed it in, you had to make sure that ladder was in the hole to go out to get it in down there. But getting back to the hotel, my guess is they had this, and they probably put this in the hole where the windmill is, and pumped up the town hall. Pumped up to the hotel. Now, I don't think there was any ladder trucks. I don't think Farmer or Sturbridge or anybody, had a ladder truck. So basically, That's all they had. That's all they had.
If I can just chime in here for a moment, if the second fire was indeed in the mid to late 40s, the town would have had their 1942 Ford fire truck.
Right.
Okay.
And just guessing, like Bob said, they would probably put this down in the stream, pump water up to the 42, and then the 42 was probably attacking the fire.
All right. Why don't we talk about this truck, right from the beginning? What's the name of it? Who made it, and how did it get to Brimfield?
Okay. This was made by the
Buffalo Fire Appliance Corporation
Right.
in Buffalo,
New
New York. Yes.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was fire chief at Brimfield when this truck was bought. So he basically put it to service, which is the first truck the town ever owned. And there's a little funny story going with this. My grandparents lived down on Holloway, where Steve Pfeiffer lives now. That was their farm down there. And when the fellow delivered it from the factory, he delivered it right to the farm. He didn't come up in the center of town. And there was nobody home at the farm except my mother. And the salesman said, well, where's your father? She said, oh, he's up in the center of town. And they said, okay, well, I'll take it. He said, so would you like to drive it? Well,
How old was your mother at this point?
probably about 14 or 15. And so she drove it all the way up. And she came down Main Street blowing the siren. And of course, the Brimfield garage was there, and the highway department was out back of the Brimfield garage. And Maddox's store was where Extra Mart is.
Yeah.
And that was the gathering of all the men. So she comes flying down through Main Street, and my grandfather, and needless to say, there was a bunch of guys that were very upset because a woman drove the fire truck for the first time. So that's a story there. And then in 1974, I was fire chief, and I took it out of service. So my grandfather put it in service, and I took it out of service.
Well, we were talking about the capabilities of this truck in terms of gallons per minute pumped and durability and so forth. How long was this truck in service in Brimfield as first line fire truck?
Well, by my calculations, about 47 years.
All right. And it lost an engine at some point, right? Mm-hmm. What happened?
This was before my time, but what I heard was that when this was the main first response engine, it was kept up in the Brimfield garage up here that we've talked about. And apparently they lost the heat in the garage one night in the winter. The truck wasn't winterized and the block cracked.
So they had to, and that was what year, do you think?
I think it was in the 40s, but I can't swear to that.
All right, so they put a different engine
Yeah.
in, and that engine is still the engine that had just been removed, right?
Yeah.
To be,
As I understand it,
Yeah,
yes.
to be rebuilt.
Basically, they put in an updated version of the engine that had been in it.
you know, I think the audience would be interested to know how fire trucks run, how they actually operate from the old, the first ones that were put in service, such as this one, to the modern ones. The pumps run off of the engine, the automotive engine, huh?
Right, and one of the things is, and it's kind of humorous, if you look at this, to put the pump in gear, there's a lever in here that you push the clutch in and pull it back, and then you shift the transmission into a gear, usually third gear, and you let it out, and that will run the pump. It disconnects the transmission from the rear end, and it runs the pump. If you go over and look in the modern truck today that's over in the fire station, other than it's not a big lever, it's a pull button, it does the same thing.
So it's the same design.
Same design.
And those engineers back then had this,
They had this down pat.
they created the model, and even the most modern trucks run basically the same way.
The ones that the pump runs off the main engine.
Can you explain what you've got here in the way of valves and so forth, and how you would run this?
I'll get out of the way.
Well, I've never actually run the pump on this truck, but actually talking about then versus now, the pump's, the configuration is still essentially the same. You draft water in through the lower inlets and you discharge it through these upper discharge ports.
Okay.
And it's the same thing on a new fire truck.
Yeah.
Same thing.
And so you'd hitch your supply hose, whether you were getting water from a tanker or another truck or getting it out of a water hole or whatever, you'd hitch it to your lower port here. You'd hitch your discharge lines that you were fighting the fire with to your upper ports here. You would prime your pump. There's a water tank up there that holds approximately 80 gallons of water.
Huh.
And I suspect that must have been used to help prime the pump. Once your pump was primed, you would open your valve and generally, and again, then to now, the pressure on the fire pump is controlled by throttling the engine. You want more pressure, you speed your engine up. You want less pressure, you turn it down.
All right, when you were drafting water from streams or from a tanker or something, these are the hoses that would be
Yes.
used over here, huh?
Right.
All right,
And
and
this valve, you'd put, when you got to the fire, you'd put a Y gate on this. Okay, so it would come out and you'd have two hoses.
Huh.
This would supply two 2.5-inch lines.
all right, all right. Is there anything else that would be useful? Oh yeah, we were talking about gallons per minute production from this 1927.
27.
Okay, versus a modern fire engine. This would represent itself rather well in a competition, right? I mean, as old as this could pump 500 gallons a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the bigger engines do 1,000 gallons a minute, don't
That's actually, they've exceeded that. We have 1250 and 1500 gallon pumps now.
they? Wow.
But still, if you, the basic rule of thumb is about 250 gallons per port. So if you went port to port, matching this to one of our new fire engines, I imagine they would do about the same.
About the same.
And it was funny, when you got this thing primed and got it going, you had your hoses out, and this thing would just sit there and go up and down.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was pumping water so bad, so it wanted to go so bad, it just sit there and go up and down. And we had a fire one time up by Sally Wells's, you know where her farm is, up there on the Brookfield Road.
Okay.
And we put the 58 at the house, and we were pumping off, and we ran a line from this thing down the hill to the brook down below the road there where the beavers are. And this thing pumped up that hill, and this was in the 80s, pumped up that hill, or 70s, I'm sorry, and supplied two trucks with two lines up that hill from down the bottom.
Didn't it crank out so much pressure it blew a hose?
Oh yeah, it blew a hose about halfway up the
That's
up the
pretty
hill.
doggone impressive. You know? All right. Bob, you told a story, we were talking before, earlier, about how Brimfield got its first tanker. why don't you go back and go over that again? And what the tanker, how the tanker would work with this fire truck.
I took over as fire chief. One of the big things that has always been in Brimfield, or in any small town that doesn't have a water, water supply, town water supply, is getting water to the fire. I mean, that's a problem today. Only it's a lot better because we have bigger tankers and things. But back then we didn't have any tankers, and this was in the probably late '60s. The civil defense had a 1943 deuce and a half from government surplus. And I went to the civil defense director, and he, gave it to me. And I took it to Chucky Hastings, who used to run where One Stop is. And he had an old 1,000-gallon tank up in his junkyard. So I said, I'll trade you. There was a kitchen on this truck, a stainless steel kitchen. I'll trade you the kitchen for the tank if you put it on. So we did. And then we got it up here. And Tommy Smart from Munson came over, no expense, and took the pump off of our 42 fire truck that we were getting rid of and put it on the deuce and a half in the fire station. And then we painted it and prettied it all up and that sort of thing. And another little story with that was Buddy Sherman lived up here on Haynes Hills, and he drove it. He was the driver of that truck, and his wife was kind of artist. She couldn't let her, so we had it up there, and Grace wouldn't let her in it. We had a fire down in West Springfield on Washington Road. And we went down and we put the fire out and this and that. And I happened to be walking around the back of the tanker, and going across the back was Brimfield Fire, and then it wasn't completed, but one of the letters, the white paint went right down the truck. And I said, Buddy, what was this? Well, my wife was painting and I forgot to tell her, and he took off and the brush went down. So that was quite a...
Okay, can you explain what this deck is and this pole, what it's used for? And also, at the same time, how did you get the people, who were the firefighters? Where'd they come from?
Well, up until the time Hitchcock Academy closed, which was in the 50s, every single time there was a fire, the windows would come flying, the siren would go off in the Brimfield garage, and the windows would come flying open at Hitchcock Academy over there. And just about every guy in the school would come bailing out the windows, run across the street, get on the truck that was up in the center of town. It wasn't this one. It was the 42. And that truck would go to the fire, and there'd be guys all over that thing. Of course, everybody wanted to get out of school. And I've got records from my grandfather, because he was still chief, of all the guys that would go to fires during the day. And as I went through, I'd see, Brassy from Wales, different men, and they weren't from Brimfield. And I got wondering, why were all these guys, and it dawned on me, these are all the fellows that were going to school over here that he had to pay $1 an hour to, but they were from Wales and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that,
And they would be fighting fires in their street clothes, whatever they were wearing in school.
oh yeah,
So this turnout gear that modern firefighters
that
have is,
didn't come into real play until we got in going good with, you know, new modern trucks and that
Yeah.
stuff. But every time he bought a truck, we'd buy probably a half a dozen sets of gear and that stuff. But
so when the siren went off, the young men from Brimfield would come, bail out of the schoolhouse and jump on the fire truck and basically stand here, and hang on.
Probably not so much
Probably
there
not so
because
much there.
the running boards in front of the rear tire carried a lot of equipment. I
Okay.
have some pictures somewhere. I think they had pump cans mounted there. They would probably ride more toward the back end up on the hose bed.
Up on,
All right.
they ride up on top.
Okay.
There'd be all kinds of guys up on top. Because the
Okay.
the hose was up all the way up to here.
All
There
right.
was hose all the way up to here. And when you got to the fire, you'd pull the hose off if you're going to use it in water hose. You'd pull the hose off, somebody would sit on it, okay, so it wouldn't go anywhere. And the driver would go from the fire to the water hole, and this hose would be coming out, you know, just rolling right out behind the truck. And then they'd break it, hook it up, and start pumping up to the fire.
I just want to throw in here right now, we still do it the same way today.
Yeah, same way today.
All right. Now, I guess, can you think of anything else you'd like to talk about with regard to this truck?
One other thing too, I just happened to think of, in '66 when I took over, the only thing we had was a siren. And we had fire phone and the Woodbine, county line, my house, Dick Morris's house, my mother's, and I guess that was it. Okay. And that's all there was. You answered the fire phone, and there was a little button by the phone, and you blew the siren. Would just push the button and it automatically blew the siren. Well, like John said before, he's up in the Warren Room. He doesn't, half the guys, 3/4 of the guys couldn't hear the siren. So, at first, my wife and Sandy Morris would sit down and go through a call list and call every guy to tell them there was a fire. And in, I don't know what year, probably around the 70s, we got Plectron alerters. We talked the town into giving us 13 Plectron alerters, which, when you hit the button for the siren, would automatically hit the button to blow these electronic plectrons in each person's house. Well, these things were this big. You know, I mean, they were huge. Now you see the guys with the little things about the size of a cell phone, which is the same thing. And each year we would try to get a few more and a few more, and then we went to those kind.
Now, these devices that would make a noise, would they tell the firefighters where the fire was?
Oh, no.
Only that there was a fire.
Only there was a fire.
And how would you confirm there was a fire? It wasn't like a false alarm or something of that nature? Or you couldn't?
You couldn't.
So you basically just went if somebody
went,
called.
and if it was a false alarm, you shoot somebody out. That's about the way it went.
All right. Now this 1927 Buffalo is actually in a Connex, a steel Connex container behind the highway department.
Right,
It's missing its motor
right,
because the motor needs to be rebuilt.
right.
Can you explain what your future plans, what you hope to do with this truck?
Well, what we hope, the truck presently is owned by the Brimfield Firefighters Association. Excuse me. And a few years ago, the motor was running, but the transmission let go. I was actually driving it on my way to a parade. It just started making horrendous noises. And we took the transmission, the engine and the transmission out of the truck, because you either had to take out the engine or the fire pump to get at it. And disassembled the transmission to a certain degree and found out that it was pretty badly deteriorated inside. There'd actually been water inside it that we didn't know about. And it ate out the bearings and everything. So I was put in contact with a fire truck restorer down in Manchester, Connecticut, who I've seen his work. He's a member of the Connecticut Fire Truck Museum at the Connecticut Trolley Museum. He's done work for them, and he does very nice work. And he came up and looked at it, and to just get the ball rolling, this isn't a complete restoration, this is just to get it running again and check out a few other things that we want to catch before they could go bad. The initial estimate was around $7,000. And so essentially, we don't have that kind of money. So we're kicking around ideas on how we could raise the funds to get this restored, get it back out going to parades and things of that nature, and then maybe eventually address the issue of housing it.
All right.
Well, this is a good piece of history that everybody in Brimfield should be proud of. If you've got a little extra or a check or something, send it to the Brimfield Fire Association. They'd love to get this truck back running again, and so all the kids can enjoy it.
Okay. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing for this town to do that. And I'll talk to my wife, but we're gonna give you $250 to get the ball rolling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
Now tell me something about, just about the chassis, the frame. Is this in good enough shape that you're not gonna have to do major surgery? Is it basically
It should be.
still good? Okay. Okay. All right, Bobby, anything further?
No, that's about
All
it.
right, well, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.